Vikings. Few peoples in history have captured the imagination quite like them. Fierce warriors, fearless explorers, raiders who sailed from the edge of Europe and changed the course of entire kingdoms. But where did the Viking people actually come from? Were they a distinct race that suddenly appeared in Scandinavia? Or is the genetic story far more complicated, shaped by thousands of years of migration, mixing, and survival? Scientists have been wrestling with this question for decades, and now ancient DNA is finally giving us answers. Some of them are genuinely surprising. In this video, we're going to trace the genetic story of the Viking people, from the first hunter-gatherers who entered Scandinavia after the Ice Age, through the arrival of farmers and Bronze Age migrants, to the DNA discoveries that are forcing historians to rethink what it actually meant to be a Viking. And as we'll see, the truth is far more complex than the legends suggest. To understand the Vikings, we first need to understand Scandinavia itself. Today, the descendants of the Viking Age population primarily live in modern Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Iceland, and parts of the North Atlantic. Together, these countries are home to tens of millions of people, yet their influence stretches far beyond the Nordic world. That's not a small detail. Scandinavia sits at the northern edge of Europe, surrounded by seas, fjords, forests, and rugged coastlines. Geography shaped everything. It influenced where people settled, who they traded with, and who they married. Far from being isolated, Scandinavia became a crossroads connecting northern Europe, the Baltic, the British Isles, and eventually even North America. And that's not incidental. It's one reason Viking DNA turns out to be far more layered than many people expected. The Viking legacy also extends across the globe. Millions of people in countries like the United States, Canada, Britain, Australia, and New Zealand have Scandinavian ancestry. The Norse language family left its mark on English, while Viking settlements helped shape the history of places as distant as Greenland and Newfoundland. One physical trait often associated with Vikings is blonde hair. Popular culture loves this image. Yet genetics tells a more nuanced story. Ancient DNA shows that many Vikings actually had dark hair, and some genetic variants linked to blonde hair arrived in Scandinavia long before the Viking Age itself. We'll come back to that later. Before scientists looked at DNA, language provided one of the first clues about Viking origins. The Vikings spoke Old Norse, a language belonging to the Germanic branch of the Indo-European language family. That family includes English, German, Dutch, and dozens of other languages spoken across Europe and parts of Asia. Here's what's interesting. The linguistic ancestors of Old Norse ultimately connect Scandinavia to peoples living thousands of kilometers away. Languages spoken in India, Iran, and much of Europe all trace back to a common ancestral language spoken thousands of years ago on the Eurasian steppe. That connection surprised many early scholars. How could the language of Viking raiders share deep roots with languages spoken so far away? The answer lies in ancient migrations that transformed Europe long before the Viking Age began. But before we get to the DNA, we need to go back much further, to the people who were here first. The story begins at the end of the last ice age. As massive glaciers retreated from Scandinavia roughly 12 Saruseven years ago, small groups of hunter-gatherers moved north into newly habitable lands. They followed herds of animals, fished along coastlines, and gradually established some of the first human communities in the region. Ancient DNA has revealed something remarkable about many of Europe's early hunter-gatherers. Some likely had dark skin combined with blue or light-colored eyes. To modern people, that combination can seem unusual, but it was relatively common among certain ancient European populations. These early Scandinavians survived for thousands of years. They adapted to cold climates, developed specialized hunting techniques, and formed the foundation of the region's earliest genetic layer. Then a new wave arrived. Around 6,000 years ago, Neolithic farmers expanded into northern Europe. Their ultimate origins lay in Anatolia, in what is now Turkey. They brought agriculture, domesticated animals, new technologies, and an entirely different way of life. The arrival of farming transformed Europe. But the farmers didn't simply replace the hunter-gatherers. Instead, the two groups mixed. Generation after generation, their descendants combined traditions, cultures, and genes. Ancient burial sites across Scandinavia show evidence of this gradual blending. One famous archaeological site associated with this period is the funnel-beaker culture, whose people helped spread farming through parts of northern Europe. Then came another dramatic change. Around 5,000 years ago, pastoralists linked to the Yamnaya culture expanded westward from the Pontic-Caspian steppe. These Bronze Age migrants carried ancestry that would profoundly reshape Europe. They also spread Indo-European languages and introduced genetic lineages that remain common today. Scientists often associate many modern Northern European Y chromosome lineages, especially haplogroup R1a and R1b branches, with these Bronze Age expansions. The result was not replacement, it was accumulation. Hunter-gatherers, farmers, and steppe migrants all contributed to what became a layered population, a genetic mosaic. By the time the Viking Age arrived, Scandinavia already carried thousands of years of complex ancestry. And then history accelerated. Popular imagination often portrays Vikings as a unified ethnic group sweeping across Europe from a genetic homeland untouched by outsiders. The history books seem to support that image, but when scientists looked at the DNA, they found something different. The Viking Age, usually dated between the late 8th and early 11th centuries, was not simply a period of expansion. It was also a period of interaction. Vikings raided, traded, settled, intermarried, and traveled across enormous distances. A landmark study published in Nature in 2020 analyzed hundreds of ancient Viking genomes from across Europe. Researchers found that Viking populations were far more genetically diverse than previously believed. Some Viking communities carried ancestry linked to southern Europe. Others showed connections to eastern Baltic populations. In some cases, people buried with clear Viking cultural identities had surprisingly little Scandinavian ancestry at all. That's a striking finding. The traditional assumption was that Viking identity and Scandinavian genetics were essentially the same thing. The DNA suggests otherwise.